So, amid all the havoc obviously caused by the coronavirus, it's sometimes hard to see the damage caused by Brexit and the ongoing, what would be, I presume now, an absolute crisis, because we can only guess at what may have been taking place in Parliament had there been no coronavirus crisis today. Indeed, I think it's very possible that you would have seen a backbench rebellion. There is one building apparently as we speak. Again, it's only rumours. What will come of this, of course, we don't know, but we've been hearing these rumours now for at least the past 2 or 3 weeks. And of course, as with Johnson, as with May, similar things will happen when she was there. All starts as rumour, conjecture. Party members heard saying this, someone said this, and they come out and said, oh no, I didn't say that, I'm loyal. And of course, politics just keeps on turning, and turning, and turning, and turning. Of course, today's article comes from The Guardian, and it's basically this. Amid the havoc wreaked by the coronavirus, there is another danger we've forgotten. Do you have a burnout? Did you have the bunting out and fireworks prime for Independence Day? With the 4th of July designated as the moment England ends its long national hibernation and flocks to the pub. To the untrained eye, the choice of a Saturday for the great unlocking might seem a tad rash, when, Monday was available to ease people in gradually. That point was put to Boris Johnson on LBC this morning, but he couldn't even offer an approximation of an answer, which leaves us to conclude that his government of geniuses picked Saturday solely because of the pleasing headlines the 4th of July suggested, rather than forgetting this was a day when Americans celebrate their escape from the rule of a dysfunctional London elite headed by a man with more children than you could count and probably prone to gibbering in public. The date may yet acquire a new notoriety if the grand English reopening comes to seem premature, given that coronavirus is still lethally active and in the UK and has one of the world's highest death rates, and yet the 4th of July doesn't mark this week's most reckless date. With much less fanfare, another milestone was passed, one that could wreak havoc on us all on its own, especially in combination with the pandemic. I'm speaking, of course, of 11 p.m. on the 30th of June, the moment in which Britain lost the ability to seek an extension of the Brexit transition period. Unless we reach a new free trade agreement with the European Union in the next 6 months, we will be crashing out of the EU on the 31st of December with no deal. Of course, I and others have said this, I think, was their plan all along. To quote the Leave HQ, the headbangers were indeed in charge. It seemed like bad form to mention it now, when we have a deadly disease to contend with. That suits Johnson and Dominic Cummings well. They hope to bury the bad news of Brexit deep inside the coronavirus, calculating that any damage inflicted by the former will be concealed by the general trauma of the latter. COVID created an excuse, says one former Conservative minister. But the logic is persuasive. Cummings may like the politics of crashing out under cover of corona, but anyone else can surely see that it is now absolutely not the time to submit Britain to an economic shock, especially one chaotic of a break from our nearest trading partners. Recall that the Bank of England has warned that the UK faces its deepest recession since the Great Frost of 1709, and that the ODEC forecasts that the UK will suffer the worst recession in the developed world, that 3/4 of UK manufacturers are expected to cut jobs this year. Layoffs have already started, with thousands more announced this week. From upper crusts to Airbus, where the furlough scheme ends, there may be more. Mass unemployment is coming. Consumer confidence will shrink as those with money become even warier of spending it. If, on top of that, Britain leaves the EU without a deal, or a deal so thin it's barely better than a no deal, it will fall as a blow to the skull of a man already bleeding. None of this is abstract. The government has already published the tariffs that would be imposed on basic food items necessarily imported from the EU. They would add at least 12 pence to a 500 bag of dried pasta, 4 pence to a tin of tomatoes, and to some that doesn't sound like much, but of those counting every penny, that could make a difference. If you're grappling with food poverty, an increase of 20% or more on staples will be ruinous. In normal times, charities might step in, but many of those are fighting for their own lives, their high street shops devastated by the collapse in footfall brought by the lockdown. This is how the coronavirus and a no-deal Brexit compound each other. Their combined damage greater than the sum of its parts. Ministers like to play down the coming Brexit pain, suggesting that since all industries are going to have to adapt to COVID-19, they might as well adapt to an EU crash-out while they're at it. But that's completely wrong-headed. Not at least because the two different crises will affect different sectors completely differently. Travel, tourism and the arts have been gutted by the coronavirus, while manufacturing, pharmaceuticals and financial services stand to be hit by Brexit. It's two parallel shocks rather than one shock that might conceal the other, says Naomi Smith of For Best for Britain. And do we really believe this government can handle two such seismic shifts at once? Consider this. Johnson has promised to create an entirely new IT system to check goods heading from the UK to the EU in time for the 1st of January 2021. But guess what? Exporters are getting worried that the new Goods Vehicle Movement Service will not be ready in time. The Road Haulage Association calls it a cocktail for potential disaster, predicting chaos and delay at the ports, not to mention the new paperwork that will be required from British companies shipping goods to Northern Ireland. Now remember that the government also promised to have its delayed track and tracing app for coronavirus up and running by the winter. It's a brave citizen who reckons that they'll succeed on one of those two massive IT ventures, let alone both. Brexit once dominated our politics. Now it's barely mentioned. The Conservative landslide last December seemed to settle it. Many of the Tory MPs who would have raised the coming no-deal threat have been purged. Keir Starmer is wary of raising it. He has his eye on Leave seats and is in no hurry to play the die-hard Remainer. He didn't even press the government to seek an extension to the transition. The result is a double danger to this country. A hurricane is coming, and yet we are blithely choosing this of all moments to set sail off into uncharted waters all alone. And I said right from the very beginning, this is not going to end well. Even if you took Brexit just by itself, we cannot simultaneously try and navigate at a time where Britain is set to have, according to the ODEC, one of the worst recessions ever. And that's not just an international organisation saying that, that's also the Bank of England saying that. We are going to absolutely crash out horribly, and as we've said before, Brexit was just a train wreck in motion. You can see the crash coming. The tracks have been rent off the rails, and you can see the crash happening, and yet no one seemed to have the bravery in public office to put the brakes on. Why? Because the Brexiteers are so desperate to get out of the EU, because they're doing this because they are being ideologically driven by free market fundamentalists, by the ERG, who want to turn this country into a new oligarch's paradise. They want to turn it Singapore on the Thames. None of the coming Tory policies are going to help one bit to help mitigate this. And as we've said before, for us Remainers or Rejoiners, all we need to do was just let Brexit happen. Euroscepticism will be dead on arrival. It will be dead on the 2nd of January 2021. And then the fight back starts. Because as many of people like myself who are part of Remain groups or things like that, we've all said the same thing. We just need to let Brexit happen. And as I mentioned yesterday, Leave HQ, one of the biggest platforms for Brexiteers and Brexiteer supporters on Twitter, has been tweeting some very, very specific buyer's remorse tweets about Brexit, considering you only have to look back at their past tweets to see how much, they wanted it. But then again, guys, I guess you're not believing hard enough. And as one person said in response to their tweet, guess what? You won. You've got to own it. It's your fault. It's all on you guys. This is what you wanted. We warned you and we told you the consequences. And you said it was Project Fear. Turns out it was Project Reality all along.